Ravensbruck Concentration Camp was an exclusive camp for women, which during the Second World War around 132,000 people passed through the barbed wire fences. It's believed that around 50,000 of the prisoners who arrived at Ravensbruck never made it out, and it was a place where the SS guards were incredibly brutal and sadistic. Thousands of inmates arrived there from many different countries, and there were even prisoners from the UK or America, but the conditions were horrendous, and there were also many medical experiments which were carried out. Ravensbruck was also considered a training centre for many female guards, and they were schooled in how to establish and set up a reign of terror, with guards such as Maria Mandl teaching others how to be violent and intimidating. Many of the former members of staff of Ravensbruck were executed for their conduct at the camp, but what is the story of the horrific torture of the women there? Join us today as we look at this, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Heinrich Himmler himself ordered the construction of a camp, which was intended to hold just women or female inmates. Construction of the camp began in November 1938, and the first prisoners came in May 1939, and the SS moved 900 women from Lichtenberg to the new camp. But quickly the camp got overcrowded and full, and as time went on in the war the camp was expanded, especially following the invasion and occupation of Poland. It's believed that when Operation Barbarossa was launched, around 5,000 women were imprisoned, with many at the time suffering from starvation as the food was not sufficient for the prisoners. The largest amount of women there was at one point was around 45,000, but during the first year of prisoners being based at the camp, it was believed that around 47 women a day were dying from the conditions, mostly from disease, starvation and overwork, and this figure rose as the war continued. There were also a number of children who were imprisoned there, and at first they came with their mothers who were held there. Many children then came from other nations, and lots of them died from starvation in the main camp, or the 70 subcamps where slave labour was administered as well. Executions of members of the resistance also occurred at Ravensbruck, as 4 women who were members of the British Special Operations Executive were executed there, as were many others, and even a French princess was killed there dying from dysentery. There were a number of commandants who served at Ravensbruck, including Max Kurgel and Fritz Sören, who both served for a number of years, and there were many male officers based there, but amongst the male staff were over 150 female SS guards, who were tasked with overseeing prisoners during the camp's day. Over 4,000 female guards were trained there, and many of the women stayed or went to different camps such as Auschwitz. Many of the women became senior figures in the hierarchy of other places, and many of these guards were notorious for their treatment of prisoners at other camps such as Auschwitz, with Irma Grese, Louise Danz and Dorothea Binz working there. When prisoners came to Ravensbruck, they were forced to wear a colour-coded triangle, identifying what kind of prisoner they were and where they were from. Many of the women were forced to have their heads shaved, as this was done on entry and was considered a very painful experience at times, with guards hacking their hair away, and also psychologically it was horrendous for many of the women. Most of the Jewish women based there were sent to Auschwitz on transport between 1942 and 1943, and many were killed straight away inside the gas chambers in the selections when they arrived. Ravensbruck shocked many when they first arrived, but as time went on the conditions broke down. One former prisoner of the Soviet Gulag said of Ravensbruck, "I looked across the great square and could not believe my eyes. It was surrounded by manicured lawns, covered by flower beds on which bloomed bright red flowers. A wide street, which led to a large open area, was flanked by 2 rows of wooden barracks. On both sides stood rows of trees, and along the roadside ran straight flower beds as far as the eye could see. The square and the street seemed freshly raked. To the left towards the watchtower, I saw a white wooden barrack, and beside it a large cage, the size of a birdhouse like you see at a zoo. Within it paraded peacocks, and on a climbing tree dangled monkeys and a parrot, which always screamed the same words, 'Mama.' I wondered, this is a concentration camp." The first meal in Ravensbruck also often exceeded expectations of the prisoners, but conditions after this deteriorated, to the point where one former prisoner stated, "They didn't shoot the women. We were to die of misery, hunger and exhaustion. When we arrived at Ravensbruck, it was the worst. The first thing I saw was a cart with all the dead piled on it. Their arms and legs hanging out and their mouths wide open. They reduced us to nothing. We didn't even feel like we had the value of cattle. You worked and you died." One of the most torturous parts of the day at Ravensbruck was the work that the women were forced to conduct on a daily basis. All of the inmates were forced to conduct heavy labour, and many were involved in building parts for the V2 rocket. There were other factories built near to Ravensbruck, and women were forced to work very long hours. There was also a horrific industry inside the camp, where women were supplied to work in brothels at other Nazi camps, and many of these women were forced to participate in these activities. Many of the women died quickly because of the abuse they suffered at the hands of the SS men they were forced to sleep with. Also, they died from the spread of transmitted diseases also. There was a gas chamber established at Ravensbruck as a hut near to the crematory was changed to become a site of mass murder where several thousands of women were killed in the months before the complex was liberated. Many of Ravensbruck's prisoners were also shipped to the Uckermark police camp where they were executed, and around 3,600 prisoners were killed in this manner. Inside of Ravensbruck was a torture centre, which became known as a bunker. Inside was a number of cells where solitary confinement and torture occurred. Women who found themselves inside here were often starved and also beaten, whipped and in some cases executed by gunshot. Many women were forced to be tortured in public, where they were whipped in front of a large crowd to send a clear message to the other inmates. Women inside the bunker were often whipped very hard, more than 25 times. It was believed that more than 20 lashes could be deadly. If 25 lashes were delivered twice, then it's likely someone would be killed by this. Many women inside the bunker were also forced to stand in flooded cells and cold water for days on end, and many would get hypothermia. Medical experiments were also extensive at Ravensbruck, and lots of the women were killed in sadistic ways by the human experimentation. These experiments were conducted without consent and in deceiving ways. Many drugs were tested on inmates, and some experiments involved cutting the leg bone and causing wounds to become infected with deadly bacteria, or introducing glass and wood shards to cause an infection. A number of medical staff also deliberately broke the bones of others, and many of these patients died from the experiments. A number also died from the infected wounds that did not heal, and a number died from the pain they were subjected to. Those who survived were left with permanent damage for the rest of their lives. Many women were also forcibly sterilised, and all had been deceived into this. The guards were the ones who inflicted such suffering onto inmates on a daily basis. Many of these were women who were later brought to trial and were accused of deliberately inflicting death onto inmates, and also being violent brutes that would attack prisoners. Prisoners were beaten if they did not do much work, and also in the roll call yards, gallows were found, and women were hanged if they resisted or broke the camp's rules. These were often left for hours and days to send a message to others, and the guards were the executioners. Lots of female guards became known for their attacks and their brutal and tormenting nature, and they were the ones who inflicted the torture on a daily basis. Following the war, the Ravensbruck Trials took place, and many SS guards and female members of staff were sentenced to death for war crimes and crimes against humanity, relating to their conduct at Ravensbruck. Fritz Sören, the former commandant, was executed, along with many other women. But the evil of the guards was something that never left the minds of the former inmates of Ravensbruck. The camp was so different as it was exclusively a women's camp, but ultimately it was the same as all of the other deadly camps, in which disease, violence and execution was common on a daily basis. As mentioned, around 50,000 women never made it out at Ravensbruck, and today their stories remain untold parts of the Second World War. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.